something happening here. But what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Salutations, good morning, and welcome. This is your host of the Readman, Truth to Power Hour, Jesse Turner on 103.5 WNHH, New Haven, Connecticut. Reaching out to all those New Haven residents in Connecticut and the world, because people listen to us all around. But today I want to say a special, happy Friday to the greatest city in Connecticut, New Haven. And I want to say before the show ends, thank you to Harry for being a wonderful engineer. And thank you to the station for giving us this time. Anyway, I'd like to begin. We talk a lot about writing in schools and education. And I have Dr. Brian Ripley Crandall from the Connecticut Writing Project. And I'm allow him to introduce himself and tell us about his passions. And then we'll have a discussion, because it's not so much the how you write, but really, not rather what you write, but it's how you write and how you invite. And I think the writing projects invite people to become writers. Sorry. Anyway, Brian, I'm raining on your parade. Tell us who you are and share your passions.
Well, first of all, I just want to say hello to New Haven. It's one of my favorite places to work in the state of Connecticut. And special shout out to Possible Futures and that incredible bookstore that I love going to as much as possible. She's a huge advocate for all educators and students, and I just have to give that shout out. So I am Brian Ripley Crandall, or Dr. Brian Ripley Crandall, and I'm of the Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield University. I know Dr. Turner because there were 3 sites in the state of Connecticut. One was at UConn and one was at Central Connecticut State University with Linda Valerie. And we are part of the National Writing Project Network, which is a cohort of 150 sites across the United States that invest in teachers as writers. And our mission is that teachers need to teach teachers, and in order for an educator to be a reform agent, they need to get in touch with what they're thinking about as well. And they need to model with their students the kind of writing that they're expecting. And so as part of a National Writing Project Network, we have summer institutes, and we run workshops, and we do professional development, and we do model lessons, and we run programs for young people all across the United States. And the whole idea is to get young people on their feet writing in a wide variety of genres and seeing the power of words and the power of writing when they take it from their brains and put it down through their phalanges and commit it to the page. And so I've been in the state of Connecticut now for about 15 years. I came specifically for 2 reasons. One, to be a director of the National Writing Project, but 2, because of the literacy gap in the state of Connecticut. And, naive, I thought, I'm going to go down there and see what this large achievement gap is, this opportunity gap, as Milner would call it. And I wanted to do my part by working with local schools to see where can we kind of start filling in the gap so that more young people have opportunities to be successful. And so when I was looking at the demographics of the United States and looking for a place to do my work, Fairfield University had a writing project job open, and I saw its proximity to Stamford and New Haven and Waterbury and Bridgeport, and I said, this is perfect for me, and so the rest has been history. So what else can I tell you? I did my doctorate at Syracuse University. I'm from upstate New York. I taught over a decade in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Kentucky Education Reform Act was occurring, which allowed for portfolio writing assessment grades K through 12 that was sent to the state for assessment in the scoring of a school. And kids had to write in every genre and across all disciplines. So as a result, my years of teaching in Kentucky were all about writing instruction and the investment in teachers as writers. And I loved it. And then the Common Core came at us, and writing all of a sudden went to the side, and it became test only instruction. And so I went on and did my doctorate at Syracuse University to figure out what is a game plan to best support the young people that we work with. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
So this is the unique thing about the writing projects. There's so many quotes and things that I looked at that prepping and researching for this time together today. And one of them was James Baldwin's quote. So I threw it in the chat box, but it's really quickly. You write in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you can't. Trying to read from it, but also knowing that literature is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to how people see it, and you can alter it by a millimeter. You change it all. So, and I paraphrased that towards the end there, but for Baldwin, and I think the writing project connects to James Baldwin, connects to so many famous researchers, so many famous writers. So when I think about that connection to writing to change the world. So when I see a lot of professional development, I'm not talking about writing projects. I'm talking about other professional developments. They seem to be focused on what teachers should do, not on how they should do it. And the how that I always say that teachers don't pick what they teach. What they do is they're controlled how they do it. So can we invite it? So what I'm thinking about with writing projects is that you're not just saying everybody knows we should put a period at the end of a declarative sentence. We need to have some commas and some semicolons, and you indent the paragraphs. We all know these things. But how do you really engage writing? And I think Baldwin's writing was all about, he wrote to change the world. So as a gay black man living in, think about the times he's living in, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Those are tough times. And so he changed the world through writing. So I tell us how your profession, because before we started, you talked about a very successful professional development you did in New Haven, and maybe that's a good, but writing projects are different. You make teachers write. You make them, if the teacher writes and the kids see them write, if you say to write a poem and I share the poems that I've written, well, it changes everything. Could you talk about what professional development in writing projects is like and how it differs from how to write? I'm not saying that you're not doing how to write, but you're doing it differently.
Well, for me, this has been the story and the trajectory of my entire career, trying to figure these questions out. I put into the chat myself, when you put the James Baldwin quote, I put in an African proverb that I've used over and over again. Until the lion learns to write, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And to me, being a writer and having the ability to communicate with text on the page is a political act. And for so long, literacy has been kept contained by certain populations without access to other populations. And how did I get to that way of knowing? And it's a trajectory of my entire life story. So I'm from upstate New York, Clay, New York. My grandparents lived in Hamilton and Sherburne, two small towns in that region. My one grandmother, whose ancestry was from the Ukraine, kept journals, and she always kept notebooks. She was always drawing and doodling and writing poetry and playing with words. And so I love doing that too. Like if I left a crayon drawing, which was a doodle, at her house, the next time I came back to her house, a couple weeks later, she would have written a poem about my doodle and made it come alive. And so for me, I realized that the visual is connected to the textual, and that when committed to page, it's storytelling. So that was always in the back of my mind, but I was a math kind of guy in high school and middle school, and I was thinking pre-med or becoming a psychiatrist, but I did like to write. I always liked to write, but we never had to write really in school. Like, it was sort of like I had a fifth grade teacher who made us write creatively, and then nothing happened again until our senior year. We had to write a research paper, and I was like, we were not taught to write in between. So then fast forward, go to college, and that's all you do to survive. You're writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, well, why aren't we teaching writing better in K-12 schools if success, or at least collegiate success, is all about the written word?
Right.
So after I finished my undergraduate degree, well, I should say, because this is connected, when I was an undergraduate, I signed up to go overseas to London on a program because I thought, as an English major, that's what you do. And the program was called Literature of Exile and the Black British Experience. And there I had the fortune of working with Caribbean scholar Carol Boyce Davies, not knowing that I was working with a giant, with an amazing human being who is well known internationally for her scholarship, because I was 19. But I took her classes. I heard her. She introduced me to several people in the area, including Beryl Gilroy, who was the first black headmistress in a city school of London, who wrote YA novels, middle grade novels. And so I interviewed Beryl Gilroy, and then I wrote a paper for Carol Boyce Davies. And over the years, like Carol just kind of mentored me. Didn't realize how much she invested into me until I decided to teach. So I have this mission for civic engagement and doing better for the world. I have this mission for uh, bringing access and power to communities that are too often ignored in our nation. And then I moved to Louisville, Kentucky at the time of the Reform Act, and where writing was central. And I taught at a really quirky but beautiful school founded in 1972, public school, where they took one boy and one girl from each of the city's zip codes. And super diversity and inclusivity was the mission of the school. So I had the Taj Mahal of teaching experiences because it was K-12, it was public, and if it was out there in the world, it was in my classroom. We did not track. So kids who had special needs and English language learners were in the same spaces as high achieving, more accessed suburban kids. So I did that for 10 years and realized I had to figure out a way to create a mini democracy in my teaching spaces at the same time that writing instruction was so important. And within my first few years of being in Kentucky, everyone who I looked up to, the teachers, the veterans that I saw that I thought were amazing throughout the district, would always say, you need to do the National Writing Project Summer Institute. You need to do the Louisville Writing Project. You need to spend your summer and do that work because it will change your career forever. And so, year five, you couldn't apply until you had 5 years of experience. And so I went in year five, and at Central High School in Louisville, Kentucky, home of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, that library, I did the Summer Institute and got my writer's notebook and learned from teachers all across the state and invested in my own writing and started to see the importance of writing with my own students. I sometimes do a workshop throughout the state of Connecticut about the things that I wrote as a 20 something year old at that time in my notebook that I still have. I can see how that planted a seed for all my life's work, right? And all the trajectories in my adult life were born because the state of Kentucky, the National Writing Project, invested in me as a teacher to see myself as a writer and a change agent. And so I started doing that with my students as well. For example, one of the things that happened in that summer, because we had to write something creative, and in the back of my mind, I had this senior, or this girl who was a junior, she was going to be a senior, and she wanted to have a drama club at our school. And I was like, we don't have a drama club. We didn't have faculty that did that. But then I happened to see at Actors Theater in Louisville a 10-minute play festival where playwrights from across international playwrights came and wrote these little 10-minute snapshot plays, like little SNL skits. And I saw it, and then in the summer, because we were supposed to write creatively, I thought, what if I wrote a script? Let me try to write a script like these playwrights do. So I did, and I had my model. And when I got back to school the next year, I said to the student, I said, I think we could do this playwright festival, right? We're going to read Euripides. We're going to read Shakespeare this year, but let's see what you all can do as playwrights. And so we started looking at sitcoms, how they were written. We looked at SNL skits. We looked at little plays, including my own model. We looked at Free to Be You and Me by Marlo Thomas and taught Boy Meets Girl. And from there, my junior class, everyone wrote scripts. And from there, she chose her favorite and she got a theater club started. And we started a 10-minute play festival at our school, which then eventually started raising money because we would do two shows, but people wanted more. And then we would raise money for the senior class trip. So I saw it was economical. And it kind of just passed on year to year to year. Kids were writing the scripts, and it was kind of like something that they looked forward to doing. And because script writing was based on the lives these young people knew, some of them were comedic, some of them were tragic, all of them were social commentary on what it was like being a teenager in the 2000s, for example. And I realized that, like, okay, so that was born out of a writing project activity. I don't even know what the demonstration was that kind of sparked that idea. And I realized that this is powerful. Same thing happened with spoken word poetry. I had a young man who, like when he came to me one day, he was like, "Oh yeah," he goes, I want to do a research on spoken word poetry." I was like, "Do you have any game? Do you do poetry?" And he just on the fly just spit out this incredible poem. And I was like, "Holy cow, who taught you how to do this?" He goes, "Oh, it's just who I am." So then I started asking teachers at the school, why didn't anybody tell me that this kid had this kind of talent? And they didn't know he did. And so then when I went back to him and I was like, why have you been hiding this from everyone? He goes, "It's not that I'm hiding it. None of you ever asked if I could do this." And I started thinking that, if you're student centered, then you can find out what the talents are of the kids and kind of build from there. And so I worked with him, and he started doing professional development for teachers about teaching spoken word poetry. And he would go to like state conferences with me and stuff. And then he would do his game, he would do his thing. And it was just amazing. And so for me, because of my luck of being in Kentucky and being at a school that was super diverse, and also started to receive like 30% of our schools started becoming kind of ESL, like what's happening across the nation. It started to spark in my head, like, how are we helping all kids to achieve greatness with the language practices that they already have? And I was allowed to do that because the Kentucky Education Reform Act allowed us to assess writing in a variety of genres that allowed us to bring voice, or the voices that kids had, up to the forefront. But as I said, all things come to an end. And the Common Core, which had some perks to it, also limited writing assessment. And as a teacher, for those who aren't teachers, it is when a state decides how they're going to measure schools. Yep, there you go. They will end up forcing teachers to teach towards those tests. And teaching towards the test does nothing but create test takers. It doesn't create readers and writers. And so professors like Dr. Turner and we bond over trying to fight these systems of test-only instruction so that young people can find their identity, can discover who they are. And for me, like, once I discovered journaling and the importance of writing, which I got from my grandmother, to go back full circle, I realized that that's how you live. It's like breathing. Writing is a way of knowing, and we would be denying kids ways of knowing if we weren't encouraging open writing practices in our classroom spaces on the daily. And so that's kind of where my foundation came from, and ever since then I've been on a mission of how do we best help teachers to create writing practices with their students that will bring greatness to the forefront. Unfortunately, those same not policing, but it is policing, but the same top-down management of teaching to the test, it constantly manipulates and monopolizes teachers' time. And, they'll often say, "This is great. This is a great workshop. This is wonderful examples that you're giving us." But the truth is we have to increase our test scores, and they have to go back to that kind of instruction. And so, to counter that, my teachers and I have created summer programs at Fairfield University called Young Adult Literacy Labs, where they can really teach writing in a variety of genres. And so we've been publishing Young People of Connecticut for over a decade, in all types of varieties. Some of the kids are writing scripts, some are writing novels, some are writing poetry, some are writing college essays, some are writing op-ed pieces. But they come and they work with teachers on campus, who know how to teach writing, and then we bring in professional writers to talk with them so that these young people can build their own skills. And to stay true to what the Brown School taught me in Louisville, Kentucky, I love super diversity. I don't think we learn anything if we're in a homogeneous state. I think we need, heterogeneity in all of our classroom spaces because you learn from difference. So I work very hard to make sure that all of our programs are super diverse to represent the demographics of the state of Connecticut. And it works. The kids sort of fall in love with that diversity and the teachers love it too. So after they finish like the summer programs, they're constantly reaching beyond their own school districts to try to create interdisciplinary cross-district writing opportunities because they see the value of writing with people who are different than you. And so that's kind of where I am right now, and that's a lot of information for your listeners.
Yeah, it
And I'm sure
is.
you have some questions.
Well, it reminds me of one of the powers of writing projects. When we go back to before I raised Donald Graves, one of the
Yeah,
old Donald Graves books in Australia, there's a great quote in there. It opens up him talking to the Australian Reading Association about writing. But he says this quote, and I'll paraphrase it because I don't want to read it word for word. But he says that a teacher who doesn't write in the classroom with the students has the effect of being a fully clothed person at a nudist colony.
yeah.
And the power of the writing project for me when I was in it was I may have went going there first thinking, well, I'm going to learn how to teach them to write better or something, and all of a sudden I was asked to write. I was asked to write what I was passionate about. I was given the choices of genres. Could I do poetry? Could I do short stories? Could I do images? All these guys, and because the project demanded that I become a writer, it empowered me. It changed my perspective. I had been a teacher for 17 years at that point,
Wow.
and I had taught writing in that way, that old traditional way of, okay, here's the topic. Now we're going to begin this, almost like a persuasive essay in the old CMTs kind of concepts. Never would, just I was not writing, sharing what I was doing with my students, and so I know now that they looked at me and said, "This is crap. This is bull. You're not writing this. You're not writing poetry. Do you even write? What do you do besides grade out papers?" So that
Can
kind
I
of
can I flip the interview for a second? I'm going to
yeah. Go
flip the
ahead.
interview for a second. So, okay, New Haven, I know you're listening to me, but I also know that the National Writing Project Network is a large community and we share everything with each other. That's the teachers teaching teachers. So I know that this local interview in Southern Connecticut is going to go national because I'm going to make sure that it is heard by others in our network. Jesse, can you tell me, that's Dr. Turner's first name, can you tell me a little bit
Jesse.
about your teaching experience? Like where were you and what writing project did you do?
Okay, I was in the Southern Arizona writing project, and it came at a wonderful time. So we were in the language reading and culture department. I was doing my PhD. I had wonderful faculty members, Kathy Short, who's really about literature and inquiry, Dan Kirby, who does about writing, Ken Goodman, Yetta Goodman, all kinds of people. And it came at a time just before I took a job to teach on the Tohoto O'odham Reservation in Arizona. And at that job, so when we look at it, I always, there goes the work, the dissertation, 2 years study. And what did I, and so when we say what I taught, what the project taught me was that I needed to come to know my students. And so here I was, a white man from Jersey, teaching only Native Americans. It was an upward bound program, and it was the only one of its country that only allowed one, you had to be Native American to be in that program. And it was one of the five top rated upward bound programs in the nation. But what I'm saying is, I quickly learned that I didn't really know a lot about Native Americans. What do they teach us in school, especially culturally? And so I started to realize that I needed to give them the freedom to write. I asked my students, "What would you like?" I was teaching the reading class. I said, "What would you like to read about?" So much surprise to me, they didn't want to read the kinds of things that we had on the syllabus. But they said, we'd like to read about our culture, our heritage, our traditions. And so I said, heck, this is the reading class. Let's read about those things.
Well, I
And we
think you
read
and I,
about
this is
those
why
things.
you and I have bonded over the years in Connecticut from afar. We're not, it's not like we
Yeah.
worked together, but I always was aware of what you were doing. And I often say that too often our K-12 schools are shaping kids to meet the needs of curriculum when we should be reshaping the curriculum to meet the needs of kids.
Right.
And that means that every educator should know the individuals in their classroom and then figure out how they want to teach and what they want to do. And you sparked something for me that I had taken notes earlier when you said Upward Bound. So for those listeners who don't realize or don't know about Upward Bound is a program that works with students primarily who come from impoverished backgrounds to give them opportunities to have more academic and scholastic achievements along the way, often working with local universities. And one of my greatest experiences that I had in Connecticut was when I first arrived. And I had started my summer institutes and I had been working professionally in schools. And the Upward Bound program asked me if I would join Dr. Yohuro Williams, who's a historian, who's no longer with us, but he's always on PBS and the History Channel, and I still worship the ground the man walks on. And we would meet on Saturdays, and I was part of the men's group, so we would get together on Saturdays and we'd just sit in a circle and put our hands down on our knees and um, young people from Jamaica, from Haiti, from South America, African American kids would just talk about what was on their mind. And the whole idea was staying, just let's talk. Well, when they were talking, I started writing because what they were saying was so profound, so intelligent, and so deep. And it was amazing. I'm like, why have aren't these kids being heard all over the state of Connecticut or all over the nation? So I asked the director, Ronnie Delva, would you mind if over the series of the next couple of weeks we work on op-eds? And he's like, well, I guess. I said, because it seems strange to me that like when you're sitting around talking, all the words go into each other's ears, but then they disappear. But if you can commit it to the page and you can write, then you can kind of share it with other people. You can sculpt it. You can have conversations about what is being said. So we did this workshop. I took all the things that the kids said and I just put it on a projector and I said, "This is all the stuff I heard you. You don't know who I am, but this is what you were saying. So let's write an op-ed together." And they're like, "What?" They were like, "What's an op-ed?" And I said, "Well, that's funny you ask." So National Writing Project model. Here's one model. Here's a second model. Here's a third model. Which one we can gravitate towards whatever model you want, but let's figure out how do we shape your words so that you can write an op-ed. So over a series of probably 2 weeks, the kids and I collaborated on a piece, an op-ed called "Young Men of Bridgeport Must Stand for Integrity." And because they were really frustrated by the fact that the school systems weren't teaching them towards what they wanted to achieve. Their voices were being silenced. They felt like the nation wasn't hearing them. And so we put together this op-ed and we sent it to the Connecticut Post. And the boys were like really excited that they were actually going to maybe be published. And it didn't go out and it didn't go out. And I was kind of angry because it was done in July. And I finally just called the Post and I was like, I sent an op-ed that these boys wrote several weeks ago and like we really they're sad. I'm really upset that this isn't out in the public. And they're like, "Oh, we should have told you. We're saving it for the first day of school. We want the entire district to read it." And so on the first day of school that particular year, I think it was around 2013, the sure enough, they went into the newspaper, and then and kids were like really proud at Harding High School and Bassick High School and Central High School and all because there was a combined summer project, and teachers would say to them, "There's no way you wrote this. We don't believe that you wrote this." And they're like, "No, we wrote this." And so that got me in. So I started doing professional development within Bridgeport to say these are things that kids can do. It's your responsibility as an educator to model how it's done. And I remember when we were on the last day when we workshopped, when we finally crossed the last T and dotted the last I, and I said, "You guys, are you okay with this? Do you think we should send it?" And I turned around and I'm gonna get a little bit emotional. I turned around and there are like 28 boys and they're giving me a standing ovation. I'm like, why are you giving me a standing ovation? They're like, no, 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 we're just so thankful you taught us how to do this. And I was like, it's not, I didn't teach you how to do this. It's because the National Writing Project taught me how to teach you how to do this. It's about building community. It's about reading great, awesome models. I was something that like I also was thinking about. There's a wonderful, incredible director who I admire named Dr. Jessica Singer Early, and she has a book called Next Generation Genre, which is talking about different genres that we should be working on with young people today because these are genres of this time. And I had read that book and I wrote a pre-publication, commentary for the back of it. But then she and I collaborated during COVID. We worked with several writing groups from all over the United States, teachers who were just trying to deal with the stress of COVID. And we ended up getting two special issues of Writing and Pedagogy. It's an international journal on writing. And from that 2 years of experiencing, collaborative writing and all these groups trying to make a statement about what it's like to teach writing post COVID was, like for her and I, we were reading these essays as they all came together, and they were kind of academic reflection, but they're also research because they were based on their studies. Was that all writing is local. It could be done in New Haven, it could be done in Bridgeport, it could be done at Fairfield University, but is also global, right? It's not just here, it's everywhere. And that to teach writing is to teach humanity. Sometimes I like to tell kids, like, let's look at cave drawings. They're like, why? I said, because they were communicating, right? Cave drawings is art form. It turned into hieroglyphics, right? It turned into emojis today. You're communicating. So let's look at the ways that people are communicating around the world and what are they communicating about? And then what are the genres that we use to make sure that what we have to say is read or heard or understood by other people? And it's sort of like one of my new things because we live in this AI and YouTube and internet social media generation. And I'm like, if you look at memes or if you look at JPEGs or if you look at infographics that people are putting in their posts, that's a new literacy. It's sort of like we're taking the inside of caves. We're still cavemen and women and human beings, but we're now putting it into these digital spaces to help us to communicate. And we as teachers should be like discussing all of this because it's pretty phenomenal. I saw that you just put something, you put something in the chat, so it caught my attention.
No, 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 no problem. What I'm thinking about is there's so many when you become a writing fellow and you participate in a writing project. I say it changes you forever as a teacher. It changes the way you teach, and it used to be that every writing project got federal funding,
Oh yeah.
and that federal funding is gone or hard to find these days. And this is what concerns me. How do I inspire writing? How do I inspire teachers? It's all I do is shut them down. So can you talk a little bit about how writing projects, one, how the funding helps,
Yes. Whew.
and how without the funding, what's happening to writing projects?
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm concerned.
It's a phenomenal question. So when I did the Louisville Writing Project, all the sites had funding to not only pay for like credits, so it's tuition, but also to give teachers professional development stipends for giving up their summers to invest in writing instruction. And so there was a financial infrastructure that supported it. So principals wanted their teachers to go through the writing project because they would then become incredible teacher leaders at their school. The funding did come from the federal government. It was an earmark. It was the Tea Party when they arrived. That was one of the first things they started attacking, and so that money went away. But the writing project was able to compete for competitive funding if we could provide research-based instruction. And so those were competitive grants which we received for several years, and they allowed us to lead our institutes, and we could over and over again show that the best practices is this model. And then that funding went to the wayside too. Ironically, and perhaps what's the word? Ironically, and perhaps challengingly, perhaps inspirationally, I arrived to Connecticut right when that was happening. So I got my first writing project site at a time that all the funding was disappearing. And I was like, how, for a couple years, I was able to get the competitive grants, and I was very thankful. And by the way, for the audiences, if you're into like numbers, you're talking $20,000 to support, 15 teachers. And that was great. And then that money started going away. So I started thinking about, well, how are we going to bring funding in to continue this tradition? And one of the ways I did it is, one, I write other grants. Two, I stay very close with politicians in the state of Connecticut, including Bob Duff of Norwalk, who is the majority leader and has been a diehard fan of the Connecticut Writing Project for as long as I've been here. I believe his mother was an English teacher, and that might be one of the reasons why he's so invested in it. But he fights alongside me and administrators and teachers to make sure that there's still funding for the Connecticut University system to provide workshops for teachers and kids. The other thing that I've done that is kind of like, I guess, my claim to fame is the summer program for young people. So when I came to Connecticut and I saw that families were sending their kids to sleepaway camps for large chunks of money, and then I was seeing that a lot of people just send their kids to all types of camps in the summer, a lot of sports camps. I started looking, kind of like surveying, like, what's a good cost? 1 week. What's 1 week? And I wanted to go on the lower side of that cost for 1 week so that I could bring more diversity to the program. And I promised myself that for every paying kid, I would bring a non-paying kid so that my programs are very, very, very mixed. And so we have the young adult literacy labs, which are 1 or 2 week programs in the summer that are held on our campus, and they make enough money that I'm able to give scholarships to 40 to 50% of our kids. And I'm able to save money to help invest better into teacher institutes, because we call them literacy labs, because the teachers actually go in and see the writing instruction, and then they can reflect on their own teaching practices. And from each of those labs, the kids edit and polish, and then we publish it in a book called Power of Words. It's an anthology of teachers and young people of Connecticut. We're going on our 13th publication next year. It's like a 340-page book of kid writing, third grade all the way to 12th. I should say that, you did your dissertation research and in a community of Indigenous learners.
Yes.
So one weird thing, but probably good thing about Brian Ripley Crandall is I share a similar pathway as you. When I was in Kentucky and I had Vietnamese kids were coming in from Vietnam, and I was thinking, how am I supposed to teach reading, writing, thinking, Shakespeare, the classics, to kids who didn't have as many learning experiences in their home countries? And so from the very beginning of my career, I was always thinking about immigration and the beauty of diversity and the beauty of different voices and the American dream. And I always knew that, education was the secret sauce to achieving in the United States. It was a great equalizer. And so when I was in Syracuse, I was at the time, I was like, I'm all Mr. Digital. Let me talk about digital writing. Let me talk about AI. Let me talk about this world that is changing so quickly. But because of my work in Kentucky, working with immigrant and refugee kids, I volunteered as soon as I got to Syracuse, on weekends with refugee communities, and I got very involved with African-born communities, refugee background communities that were coming in from Somalia, from Liberia, from Sudan, and the adults that I was working with, they introduced me to kids, and then I started going into schools where I was seeing the large populations of African background refugees working in their schools. And so I came back to Syracuse University after the summer one year, and I said, I don't know if I want to go digital literacy anymore. I'm just mesmerized by these young boys from Africa who are passionate about achieving in school. And I want to do my research on they're writing in and out of school. And so that's what I did. And what I realized is that the kids might have written 20 minutes a day in school, but they were writing 2 hours a day outside of school because of social media, Facebook and texting to get things done, or blogging on different websites where they had their interest in soccer. And it helped me to realize that our systems in schools should really be paying attention to the activities that kids do outside of school, because in those activities outside of school is the individuality that makes a good writer. And so once you figure out what kids are passionate about in their other communities, and those communities are invited into your classroom community, then you can start really massaging really great writing in school. And so, that dissertation that I did at Syracuse University changed my life for the better. And the 8 young men that participated with me are now family. I mean, they're just family. And when I got to Connecticut, it became very important to me that I was not only going to create literacy opportunities for American-born kids, but I was going to have a program that would also allow immigrant and refugee youth coming into this country a chance to write. And so we began Ubuntu Academy, UBUNTU, which is I am because we are. It's a Bantu philosophy from South Africa. And the young people taught me this in my research about you can't achieve anything unless you're doing it for the community, right? An individual needs to be supported by a network of other individuals. And that community-oriented practice of being was very different than our American-born competitive individual drive for success, because it was community-oriented and not me, me, me. And so in the first summer I ran Ubuntu Academy, we did it like a class, like a school would do it. We kept the kids separate, like it was their own program. And then there's all these other programs. But we learned at lunch and at recess that the kids really wanted to work with each other and play sports and learn from each other. So we started mixing up opportunities as best as we could. Two of my boys from Liberia and we co-wrote a poem called Education, Period, Education, Period, Education, because that's what they always told me. They're like, there's 3 things you need in America: education, education, and education. But since then, and I noticed you just put it in the chat, you wrote community, community, community. And if I have any contribution to the academic world, it's the idea that we need to support the individual learner with all of their communities. And that means we need to know who they are. We need to know who our kids are, and we need to know the communities that they're from, and we need to know the ways they embrace knowledge and the way that they communicate. And then I've written about this before, because com, community communication, it means with. WITH. So how do we work to be with the young people in our classrooms? How do we work to be with the teachers at our school? How do we work to be with fellow residents of Connecticut, so that we are really pushing for democracy and the American dream with the intent that it was always meant to be? And to me, that's been through writing instruction.
So writing breeds democracy. So I want to make a little shift, because we're getting down to our last, 10
You said it would go fast.
It goes fast. But one of the things, and somewhere in the chat, I wrote about Rudine Sims Bishop, who describes literature as mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And she's those mirrors, we see ourselves. So, and we need to have those experiences in the things we read. I say we need to be able to write ourselves as well. Same thing. We need to have writing mirrors. She says windows are the ways that we see the way others live in the world, and it gives us an opportunity to learn and learn positive things about others in the world. And then the sliding doors I love, because the sliding doors, Rudine Sims Bishop is a friend of mine. She said, Jesse, it's like Ernest Gaines wrote a book back in the 80s. It was an Oprah thing, but it was one about where a man is incarcerated, a black man is incarcerated. He's going to be guilty. The whole community knows it because he's black. And 2 mothers, one whose son, she knows he's going to die, but because it's just the way things were at this time. And so when we get there, she goes, the other mother is the son's old teacher. And she said, I want you to go back. They're telling him he's going to pig. He's a pig and he's going to die like a pig. And so that teacher said, I don't know what to tell him. And that discussion. But anyway, coming back to this idea of sliding doors, Ernest Gaines gave me the opportunity to live in the life of an incarcerated man, a person of color who all is going to be guilty regardless of how innocent they are. And in the book, it was clear he was innocent. But that idea, so there's a reading and writing connection here.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. So and so, what are you reading in those writing besides each other's spoken words and poems? Are you reading, like, I don't know, Reader's Digest,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
maybe
it's
you're reading
great.
the textbooks?
So I was, a lot of the research of writing people who focus on writing research also often come to the conclusion, but reading and writing go hand in hand, right? And I love the sliding glass door metaphor with Sims, and I use it in my classes too. I was thinking about there's another. It's not as well known, but there was Carolyn Hassan had this metaphor about taking what Sims said, but also tying it to English language learners. And I always remember this metaphor because it makes the most sense. And they call it, mirror, microscope, telescope. Mirror, microscope, telescope. And so the mirror, when you're working with the English language learners, and I say all learners, the first thing you need to do is have the kids write about themselves. You need to know who they are. That's the personal stuff, that's the lived experiences. The microscope allows kids to dig deep, to go deeper into what they're seeing, to like look at the details and that are kind of hidden to the naked eye. But then the telescope allows us to see way out into the future. And so I always, try to work with teachers to say, okay, let's think about who our individuals are we're teaching. Let's analyze critically the worlds that we're living in, right? And what the content is of what we're supposed to be teaching, but then help them to see where this is going into their future, right? We have to telescope. Where is this all taking us? So on the literature connection, I was in the classroom, all those years, and you start to find the books that you get 100% success, that the kids are all going to read it and they're all going to be engaged. But there weren't enough of those books in my classroom, and so I often found books that kids would read individually, and you'd feed them, hey, you should read this or you should read this, and by word of mouth kids would start passing those books around, and a lot of that is young adult literature and children's books that get poo-pooed a lot by schools because we're still teaching the canon, the classics, which I'm a both and. I think we should be doing both and. So fast forward, this kind of ties. This is a New Haven story. You ready for this New Haven story?
Yeah, we're ready.
Yeah, so here we go. So it was during Hurricane Sandy. I was still working on my dissertation, and I was afraid we were going to lose electricity in Connecticut. So I go all the way up to upstate New York so that I would have my parents' electricity. And I go to a conference, a reading conference in central New York, and I'm presenting in one room. And after I finish, I run into a teacher, and the teacher says, "Oh, I just went to this workshop. You would really like this guy." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah," but then I went home. She calls me that night. She goes, "Oh, that guy's workshop that I went to, he's stranded here too, and he said he'd come to my school, but he doesn't have a car. Can you pick him up and bring him to my school?" So I said, "Sure." That was Kwame Alexander. So the writer Kwame Alexander. So I go pick him up. I don't know anything about him. I look him up on the internet. I know he has some children's books, Acoustic Rooster and his Barnyard Band, and I'm like, okay. So I pick it up and we go to this school, and he does this really good poetry workshop with the kids, but I could tell he's playful and he's competitive, and he bumps the volleyball up to the net to see what I can do. And I was sitting there and I was like, okay. So I took his lead, and then we co-presented this poetry workshop, but I taught the writing portion of it and he taught the ideas and the performance part. And we kind of bonded. So I fell in love with the guy. So I had, through a state grant and through a federal grant and through Glenn Worthy, who was the principal at the time in New Haven, he had a turnaround grant. And I asked Kwame, because he wasn't known then, I said, "Would you be willing to come to New Haven and do a workshop with teachers with me? We're going to do Acoustic Rooster and his Barnyard Band." And my metaphor was that all teachers contribute a different part of the music to the cacophony of a school. The gym teachers offer the gym music, and the art teachers offer the art music. And so we looked at the Barnyard Band and we made metaphors, and we all made digital stories of what we contributed to the school, that thing. But then we brought Kwame, and that was the goal. However, Kwame had sent me a Word document years before about the crossover, which he was trying to get published. It's a Newbery Award winning novel that is now on Disney. If you wanna see it, read everything Kwame Alexander. So we bring him, and I call his publisher, and I say, "Is there any way we can get 200 copies of this book early? Because I want to introduce it to the kids at the school." So we were able to do that, and so we kind of introduced the crossover at the school as part of the professional development, as part of, we built this like whole reading, writing, thinking, speaking community, and it was wonderful. And of course, I was just beginning my career, and he was just beginning his career, and the school actually turned around, like their state scores started soaring. And we shared with the school the kind of the practices of, like, in order to teach writing, you need to be a writer yourself. You need to model your own writing. And so I love that story because it's so connected to the reading writing connection. Fast forward to COVID, we're all stranded at home, and before COVID hit, the National Writing Project wondered if there was is there a way we could get like writers like Kwame Alexander to do a commercial for what we do? And so I said, yeah, I think we might be able to get like 50 writers for 50 years. Because we're 50 years old, and we'll ask 50 people to do a commercial. But then COVID hit, and I said, what if we just interviewed 50 writers? Like, what if we started a podcast or a radio show where I get teachers from across the United States to interview teachers about, or interview teachers were interviewing writers about their writing processes and the books that the kids want to read. What would that look like? And so we started it during COVID, and we are now in year 5, going on to year 6. We do one a month, and I call someone across the nation. We get the teacher together to interview a writer, and we tapped into, I love Ellen O's "We Need Diverse Books" movement, and Walter Dean Myers' son Chris Myers is a part of that. And so I try to find writers that represent or write for kids in our schools, that when they don't see themselves in the library, they don't see themselves in the books that are being taught in the classroom. And so diverse text has been at the center of what we do in that program. It's called The Write Time, write, WRITE. And we start out with a writing prompt so that people can write a little bit. You listen to the interview, and then we close out with a writing prompt, which is totally the National Writing Project model. And it's been so much fun to watch because it's an investment in the community, and that we can bring different teachers from across the nation together with different writers from across the nation to spark and influence the young people we work with, because in the end, that's what it is all about. And I'm just mesmerized. The show that just came out this week was Tony Weaver Jr., who has a graphic novel called Weirdo. And it's about his middle school experience. I mean, he had a really rough time in middle school, but he found his voice through graphic novels. And so it's a graphic novel about finding his voice, and it's so heroic, and it's so beautiful. And it's just great to be able to celebrate the way kids who feel ostracized by school find their way into communicative power, right? Through the power of words or through the power of drawing, and eventually get their stuff published as well. I mean, it's been a delightful experience for me to like talk to these writers and hear what they're doing. But it goes back to the National Writing Project core, which is like, but what do we do about teaching writing? And we're better teachers of writer when we have diverse text to model writing with our young people. And so that's kind of like where I am right now with my work, is just thinking about what are the multiple ways that we can find books that will really, spark young people to see themselves and achieve with those books. You probably you probably still a dude like me. Like when I get my haircut, after a haircut, I come out of the barber going, yo, yo. And I came across a book called Crown by Derek Barnes years ago. Yeah, Ode to the Fresh Cut. And I read that, and because my boys and I go down to Jerry. He's a Haitian barber down the street, and we feel good when we leave there. And when I read that book, I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad somebody's written this book, and like buy it for teachers, and they can show kids how to write an ode and how to like you can write an ode to anything. Well, he was on the show last month because his new book, The Incredibly Human Henson Blaze, came out. It's his first middle grade novel, and it explores athleticism and our culture's obsession with athletes, especially black male athletes, and but also the pressures that that puts on kids, and he does some really interesting storytelling. I've never seen a book quite like it. It's amazing. And even before it hit the bookstores, Possible Futures in New Haven, even before it hit the bookstores, it's already nominated for awards. So I really, really recommend it. The Incredibly Human Henson Blaze. And it's basically, he was thinking about LeBron James more than an athlete, and he puts it in an eighth grade boy's perspective. Like, this kid is more than an athlete, even though he's destined to be amazing. So we have to kind of like figure out better ways to get all of our teachers savvy about the great books that are coming out, and we need to fight the book banners, the banning book people, because we know as educators how to spark life in our classrooms, and it's books that are catered to them, that share and represent their stories. And so the more we can find stories that bring their voices out, we win. But we also have to fight the people who want to silence those voices. So yeah.
It's interesting to me because as we've been listening, and our time is running, but it's this concept that it's not what we teach, because a lot of the professional development that comes from policymakers is what we do, and what we really mean, it's confining. It's sort of, this is the framework, don't go outside it. And lately they've been scripting more and more of it so that there's almost no teacher voice in that piece, and that's scary. And so I always told my teachers, we've never chose what we teach, but we can choose how we teach it, and so that's important, because then I could do all of those things. But it was interesting that you mentioned Walter Dean Myers. So I'm from Jersey City. Walter Dean Myers moved to Jersey City, had opportunities to meet him there. But one of the things about him was that here's a foster kid from North Carolina, goes up to New York City, remembers two teachers that he talks about inspired him.
Yep.
So he one is his fifth grade teacher who he annoyed the heck out of her. So she discovered if she just let him read whatever he wants, he was good in class. So he read, he said, in the fifth grade. In the 10th grade, his teacher gave him a list of books by black authors, including the biography of Malcolm X. He didn't have time to read it, but he did have time to get in trouble, get arrested, and drop out of school. And then he took that list out in prison, and it changed his whole life. So that's that idea. I say what we read is what we write, and your choice. So that's what I'm coming to. Let us end with or come to that end quickly, about how does choice in what we read and choice in what we write, how does that motivate and engage learners?
Yes, and I would say
It's
yeah,
the quick round.
I take the word choice, and you add choice with representation. Like, what happens when you have representation for your young people to choose to work towards. I was thinking about when Matt Dellapena came out with the book Love, and there's that one page where there's a little young girl with a hijab who's like laying in a flower. So she's got her headdress and she's laying in the flowers. And it's just this beautiful thing about love. The whole book is about what is love. And I remember reading it with an elementary group of kids, and this little girl came up afterwards with a hijab on, and she asked me if she could see the page again. And I said yes, and she looked at it, she studied it, she goes, "Oh my God, someone like me's in a book. I've never seen me in a book before. That's so beautiful." And I was like, yeah, representation is key. And if we have beautiful, incredible, wonderful, diverse kids in our classrooms, our curriculum should be the same.
No, 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 no problem. So I think what we're down to, the music is on. Thank you.
Good
And
song.
we have to have you back. That's what,
Always,
and
always.
remember, we got to go Possible Lives, and we got to have lunch.
Oh,
Let's set
always.
that up. All right.
Here's the Lauren Anderson. Woo woo!
Thank you.
Ain't exactly clear.
This is Harry Droz, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven.
Telling me
Best
I'm
radio
not to
station in
swear.
Connecticut.
Time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.